Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to this second slot relating to COVID-19. We had an interview earlier on with Naledi, a South African who has just recovered from COVID-19. I asked a lot of questions relating to her experience, and it was quite, informative. It was quite educational, and it was eye-opening in terms of some of the failures of our healthcare system. Now, in this second slot, she is going to be the one who poses questions to me. She says she's been dying to ask these kind of questions from a medical doctor because she's been inundated by these questions in her own platform. So yeah, welcome back. Our guest is Naledi Radebe, aka Lady, or Naledi the Star. So Naledi, you can take over now.
Okay, thank you so much for agreeing to speak to me, Dr. Fundile. Just for my followers, I just want to obviously introduce you and explain why I so specifically sought out your advice. So this is Dr. Fundile Nyati. He's considered one of the health industry thought leaders. He is the CEO of Proactive Health Solutions, which is one of the leading health and wellness service providers in South Africa. You're regularly a guest expert on health talk TV shows. You feature as a resident expert on 702 on Saturdays. In the Saturday's health feature, and of course you're a health blogger. We have that in common. We're both bloggers, but obviously I think your blogging is so much more important currently. So I kind of just want to get into the fact that I reached out to you because you have been quite vocal during this time. I think it's almost stood out that you have a wealth of knowledge and you've been sharing that along the way. And so I kind of just wanted to know where you gained all this knowledge, because it's been quite interesting to see how, some people might not know things, and it doesn't naturally assume that as a doctor, you must now know everything about COVID-19. So where did you really accumulate all of this knowledge, and how?
Well, look, I think, let me start by saying, yes, I'm qualified as a medical doctor. I'm also qualified as a family physician. What that means, I've done a postgraduate degree, a master's degree in family medicine. And that discipline called family medicine is basically a discipline of medicine where you get to do all the sub-disciplines of medicine. Obviously focusing on stuff that is common, and then you leave the uncommon or complex stuff for the specialist. So with that breadth of knowledge, I felt that it enables me to actually play this role of being a thought leader on issues of employee health and wellness, but also I'm able to tackle almost any subject on media, radio, on 702 and other areas. So when I picked up about this disease at the beginning of January, which was just a few days after it had been declared in China, I decided that I was going to feature this. It was still an epidemic in China at the time. I was going to feature that at Radio 702. And for me to do that, I needed to learn as much information as possible. So the WHO and the CDC websites were actually quite useful in helping me to actually update my knowledge about this disease. And since then, I've been reading everything that I could lay my hands on this disease. So yes, I'm a family physician. I'm not a virologist. However, I think I have a good working knowledge about the disease, and that's why I'm confident to share my knowledge with other people out there.
Thank you so much, and we actually do appreciate it, because it's nice to hear a voice of that has knowledge, that has, you know, the qualifications to be able to speak to us, especially in South Africa, as a South African doctor. So you used a word, and I want to go to it because I really have also been trying to get down to like how this all began.
Yeah.
Pandemic. What is
Yeah.
this word pandemic? What does it mean? And what is the difference between an epidemic that you said earlier?
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think let's start. If there is an outbreak of an infection or a disease in a small locality, all right, let's say in KZN or in Gauteng only, we talk of that disease is endemic. So it's localized. We say it's endemic.
Endemic.
Now, if that disease affects the whole country, you know, then we start to talk about an epidemic. All right.
Okay.
So there was this time about 3 years ago, we had an outbreak of listeriosis. You know, most people remember it because it was associated with polonies. You know, it was an epidemic. It was an outbreak, and almost different parts of the country were affected. It was an epidemic. But once a disease, once there's an epidemic that affects countries worldwide in almost all the continents, then we then say that is a pandemic. So when it was still localized in China, it was an epidemic in China, right?
Right.
But once it started to spread to Asia, to Europe, to America, to Africa, they had no choice, that is the WHO, but to declare it as a pandemic. So it is basically an epidemic that affects, you know, all parts of the world. So HIV was declared a pandemic because it was an epidemic that was affecting people across all continents. There's no continent that can say it doesn't have somebody who's HIV positive, for example. So I hope I've clarified that.
Yeah, you have. Thank you. So what exactly then, if it's a pandemic, which means it moves across continents, what exactly is it about COVID-19 that makes it so easily transmittable that it moves the way that it does, you know, and is now considered the pandemic that is considered?
Yeah. Look, the one thing about, if I now have to compare, for example, HIV and COVID-19. Now, with HIV, to, you know, the most important form of spread of HIV is through sexual, intercourse, unprotected sexual intercourse, right? A few get it through a blood transfusion, or mother to child, but it's largely around, sexual intercourse. And that is more of a lifestyle issue, okay?
Yes.
So if you modify your lifestyle, you abstain or you are faithful, then you are unlikely to get it. It's a lifestyle decision. Now, when it comes to COVID-19, coming from that family of viruses that are called coronaviruses, those viruses, they love the respiratory system. The respiratory system provides the best medium for those viruses to actually grow in the respiratory system. Now, the difficulty then with that is that when you have got an infection that is caused by a germ that is very infectious and it affects the respiratory system, because we breathe in and out, we breathe air in and then we breathe air out. So it makes it very, very difficult because we need to breathe for us to live. So there's no choice there, and so the mode of spread of this COVID-19 is actually what creates a problem. And also the fact that, we live in the world now where there's so much mobility of people from one country to the other, one continent to the other. So if you are infected in one area, tomorrow you could be landing, in America and you are actually infected. And the most difficult thing about it is that even before you start showing symptoms, you could already be infectious. So there are various aspects of this virus that makes it special, that makes it such a danger as an epidemic, as opposed to something like HIV. So the fact that it is also resilient, once you've sneezed and you've coughed and it lands on surfaces, it can stay there for days. That cruise ship that was docking, or that had docked outside of Yokohama in Japan.
Yes.
That cruise ship, they have recently done some tests on it, and they found that 14 days after the last people left that that ship, they could still find the germ there. So the resilience of the virus, the infectiousness of the virus, the system that it inhabits when it infects you, the fact that you are able to spread it even before you have symptoms. All of those things, they make it such a dangerous, and highly infectious, epidemic. And that's why we are in the trouble that we have right now.
Yes, I mean, I think I can even like testify to that, because from where I assume I got it, I would have gotten it from something as simple as a hug. Yeah. And that is just, again, like when you say, if you're going to bring in the comparison of HIV, it takes a little bit more to,
yeah.
Whereas with this.
Yeah. And most probably the person that you had met who had been infected, maybe in that hugging process, they sneeze or they cough, as they're breathing, and then, you inhale that in that close contact, because there was nothing that made you to be worried about, the social distance at the time. So as much as hugging on its own, it wouldn't necessarily infect you. However, the closeness that you attain when you are hugging, and if somebody has got the germ coming through, as they're breathing out, you are likely, to actually inhale that. And I think that is one of the reasons why we're saying people should not hug,
No, like contact.
Right? No contact, so you must not hug. Another joke is about, kissing. Certainly, there must be no French kissing. Even the French have put that on pause. So it is a challenging, infection to deal with, because most of the things that we normally do as part of acknowledging each other, as part of showing love to each other, hugging and, handshakes, these are the things that we must not do, because of the fact that this thing is so resilient and it's so easy to move it from one person to the other. The virus itself cannot move, but it is the human beings that contain it that actually move it. And that's why we have the social distancing.
Yeah, I agree. So it's kind of like now common courtesy has now shifted, and common courtesy is now to stay away from others and just, not to put your hand out to shake someone's hand anymore.
And that's very difficult, because the natural thing is you see somebody, you're happy to see them, and you want to do, a handshake. And as Doug is, we have various ways of doing the handshakes, 1, 2, 3, and that's like 3 times of infecting each other.
Okay, that's an interesting point. I actually wanted to ask you, with infection, let's say you're infected, let's say someone else is infected. How does that work? Can you reinfect each other? Is this like how AIDS works, where you can reinfect? There is, it's possible to reinfect each other, or is it more like once you're sick, the both of you?
Look, at this moment, this virus, remember, it was only, announced in China on the 31st of January. So we just have basically 3 months of knowledge and experience about this virus, all right? So it's very little time for us to be able to say, to answer certain things. However, if one just sticks to the basics. Now, when you get a virus coming, and infecting you, your body has got an immune system, which is the defense of the body. Now, there's different cells that are part of the defense of your body. Usually, there's when you look at the blood cells, there's red blood cells that carry oxygen, and then there's white blood cells, which are actually the soldiers of the body. And within those white blood cells, there's different groups of cells. There are those that specialize with bacteria, and there are those that specialize with viruses, which are called lymphocytes. All right. So if you then get infected today by COVID-19 virus, which is a coronavirus, through a droplet spread, or you having infected yourself with a contaminated hand touching your mouth or nose or eyes, it then goes to the respiratory system. And the respiratory system, it hijacks those cells so that it can multiply. But the body's immune system also picks up that there is a foreign, invader here, and so it then mobilizes other, forms of defense to try and deal with this thing. So in the process, then antibodies, are produced to try and neutralize this, and other types of immune cells are also called to come and kill this thing. So within about 2 days of you getting infected, your body will have produced what antibody is called IgM, immunoglobulin M, all right, which are the first antibodies to go and try and neutralize this thing, all right? Okay. By day 5, day 7, another set of antibodies called IgG, all right, immunoglobulin G, will then also come in and reinforce. So the ones that were quick off the mark, the IgMs, will stay in the body for a few days, maybe a week or two, whilst the long-term ones, the IgGs, they stay for a long time. So when you were being tested now for the presence of COVID-19, they took that swab, they took it to the lab, they did a test that is called a PCR, polymerase chain reaction, which looks for certain parts of the viral structure, certain proteins of a viral structure. And then if they pick up, antibodies to that, that is the IgM, the quick ones, then they are able to say you are positive, because you can't have acute antibodies to a germ and you are actually not recently infected by that. Right. So that's basically how you test. So, but over time, those disappear. Those are the ones that they look for to clear you, to say, okay, now you've been cleared of the acute infection. However, your body will then remain with the memory of this COVID-19 in the form of the IgGs, all right? So if we wanted to know if this person ever had contact with COVID-19, we will then do a test that actually looks for the IgG. If we find those, then we are able to say, you may not have it now, but you had it in the past. So it is that immune memory that then helps you when you get infected again by the same strain of COVID-19. Your body will already have the memory and will go in and neutralize that. So my long answer to your question is that it is very unlikely that a person can be reinfected by the same germ already when they have already produced specific antibodies to those germs, which is why in a hospital in New York, there's a hospital there that is actually trying to come up with an intervention where they are harvesting antibodies from people like you who have recovered or are recovering from COVID-19. They are trying to see if by injecting those, basically giving artificial immunity to the people, would they be able to recover from that? So my long answer to you is very unlikely, but because it's still very new, this condition, we can't exactly say it's not possible, but it's very, very unlikely.
Yes, yeah, so I think I've actually heard that as well, is the likelihood is if it acts like any other virus has before its time, then we should kind of assume that antibodies will protect us from this. Okay, so Let's talk about the symptoms. People are saying it's like a flu. I've gone through it. I don't know if it's necessarily like your classic common seasonal flu. But what exactly would the classic, let's say, what would the symptoms of COVID-19 be?
Well, I think let me start by saying this COVID-19, infection, or it's also called SARS-CoV-2. That is the technical name, right? So this COVID-19 is a new virus. It's a new strain from the family of coronaviruses. I'm just going to explain a little bit. Now, coronaviruses have been with us. We first identified them around the 60s. All right. And there's those that affect human beings, causing a mild common cold type of illness. And then there are those that that affect animals, where they normally don't cause any illness in those animals. All right. But now, what has happened is that the ones that cause infection in animals have crossed over to cause infection in human beings. And in that crossing over, the structure, it mutated, it changed the structure a little bit. And instead of behaving like the normally behaved coronaviruses that cause a mild common cold type of infection, these ones have become rogue and started to behave differently to the broader family, because the broader family of coronaviruses is not supposed to cause serious illness that can land people in hospital or can actually kill people. So this is the third of the rogue viruses from the coronavirus family. The first one was SARS in 2002, 2003. The second one was MERS in the Middle East in 2012. This is the third rogue coronavirus, a strain that is new. That's why they called it novel, because it had never been identified before. All right. So that is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with a rogue coronavirus that originated from animals, crossed over to human beings, and starting to behave very strangely in a way that is not like the rest of the coronaviruses. And so it is causing serious illness in at least 20% of people. And then in a few people, it may cause death, about anything between 2 to 5%. So that's what we are dealing with. So in terms of symptoms, the classic symptoms then of this virus are no different from any of the symptoms that one gets when they get a common cold caused by a coronavirus. They will have a sore throat, they will sneeze, they will cough, and they will have a rise in temperature. Not excessive rise, but normally a rise was the normal body temperature is around 37.4. So you normally have a rise in temperature around 38. All right, that's a normal symptoms of a coronavirus, the ones that are commonly infecting human beings. However, with these ones, most people will present with a mild illness like that. Sometimes they may not even need to see a doctor. All right, about 20% of people who are infected may have symptoms that are worrying, like the ones that you have. And as much as most people present with the common cold type of symptoms that I've mentioned, however, other people do present with others that are not so common. For example, they may present with a bit of nausea, they may present with a bit of diarrhea. All right. Other people in the UK where you've just been, the body that represents the ear, nose, and throat specialists, they've come up with a different, picture where they've picked up people who are losing sense of smell and also sense of taste as the only presentation, of COVID-19. And at that time, when they are doing that, they are already infectious, So the presentation because they come from the coronavirus family, is normally common cold type. But unlike that, it immediately graduates, and you have a rise in temperature, and then you have also difficulty in breathing with some people, and it becomes even worse for those people who already have pre-existing, health challenges like asthma, those people who've got heart problems, those people with immune compromise, and also some people who are much older. So that is what we're dealing with, but that normally affects about 20% of people who are infected. So most people will present with the classical symptoms of the coronavirus family, but a small percentage will present with a worsening of those common symptoms or other unusual symptoms like loss of taste or smell, or loss of taste and loss of smell, or even with a bit of diarrhea. But those are the diarrhea and the vomiting in the gastrointestinal tract are not so common. So I hope I've answered you.
Oh, you have. No, thank you. And interestingly enough, I have who suffered the loss of taste and smell symptoms, and I think that information only really came out a little bit later. So
yes,
I was very surprised.
It's only last week that they announced that.
Exactly. So I was very surprised when I heard that was a symptom, because he had complained about that being, something that he was experiencing. And so I think a lot of people probably didn't, and that's exactly what it is we're currently kind of like learning on the go, like
yes, we're learning on the go
in real time for us. So interestingly, you also did bring up the fact that I think that percentage for deaths, they've reevaluated it according to CNN. I think it's now sitting at 0.6%, which is still incredibly high. But I think it's dropped down with the new developments. And I actually wanted to ask you about that. So I've heard this conversation around malaria tablets now becoming something that can be used, and what is it, hydrochloroquine?
Hydrochloroquine.
Yes. Is that something that's fact? Do they really know, or is it something that seems to be helpful? Is it confirmed that this is now a cure? Or
okay, all right. Look, as we speak today, there is no cure for COVID-19. And by that, we mean there is no specific antiviral drug that we can give to somebody who's COVID-19 positive, and it goes and destroys the COVID-19 germ. All right. So that's the starting point. Having said that, there's a lot of researchers across the world that are trying to come up with interventions to try and reduce the number of people who are actually suffering from this. So on one side, there are researchers for vaccines. On the other hand, there are those that are looking for some magical treatment. Now, in China, over the last 3 months, there's a number of doctors that side and researchers that have been looking at trying different things. For example, they have tried this anti-malarial you're talking about that is called chloroquine. Up until recently, chloroquine was the drug for treating malaria. And remember, Africa is one of the parts of the world that is actually suffering from malaria. That is, more people with malaria. We have more people dying from malaria in Africa than any other part of the world. So, but chloroquine, we no longer use it because the germ that causes malaria has actually become resistant. But it is a drug that is known, it's a drug that is there. So some researchers in China have then introduced this chloroquine on its own, sometimes with antiretrovirals, all right? Some antiretrovirals. And in the small research that they were doing, it showed a promise, okay, in a small number of patients. Now, I mentioned the issue of antiretrovirals. Some of these antiretrovirals, like one called Calitra, which is a combination antiretroviral, it's also shown some promise on its own or in combination with other drugs. Now, all of what I'm talking to you about are drugs that are in existence, that have been licensed and approved for other types of illnesses. Now, they are looking to repurpose them so that they could be used in this new situation. So the WHO, about a week or so ago, they decided that because there are these reports of promising interventions, you know, chloroquine, you know, some ARVs, and even interferon alpha 2B. So they decided to authorize something that is called a solidarity trial, where they will test all of these things to see if they are effective in a large scale and also if they are safe. So they have chosen countries throughout the world to conduct this solidarity trial. And one of the countries that has been chosen is actually South Africa. So the hope here is that if these things do show promise in less than 12 months from now, then maybe they can give a go ahead. But at this moment, to actually take them before they are licensed for this purpose could be dangerous. Some people in Nigeria, about a week ago, they actually went and bought chloroquine or got their doctors to issue chloroquine because they listened to Donald Trump, who was actually saying, definitely this thing works. And some of them actually presented to hospital with toxicity to chloroquine. So the point here is that there are some promising drugs that can be repurposed. However, we need to wait for the bigger study to be done so that we know which ones work, which ones don't work, what dosage is safe, what dosage is not safe. So I hope I've answered you there.
Yeah, I think you have, and it really is a matter of time. Again,
it's a matter of time.
There needs to be a long enough period of time to be able to project and to collect that data, to study it over.
Exactly.
What?
Yeah, just on a related matter, the issue of vaccines. There are a lot of people who are working day and night trying to come up with a vaccine, all right? But as we speak, there is no vaccine against COVID-19. However, normally it takes something about 18 months to come up with a vaccine.
Yeah.
So there is an accelerated process that some researchers are actually undergoing, you know, or are conducting rather, with the hope that in less than 12 months from now, there could be a vaccine that could actually be used. So there is a lot of promise, you know, but at the end of the day, we need that announcement that we have found something that works. And if you use it this way, it's safe enough, yet it's effective enough to actually clear people of the COVID-19. You know, the ideal would be actually to have the vaccine, because then if we must vaccinate people, then they would have their own defense against the virus.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. I wanted to know, now let's say we're currently all in a lockdown right now, and I think people want to know what exactly, first of all, why the length of 3 weeks, and what the lockdown is essentially meant to do.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think if one understands how this virus is transmitted, I mentioned earlier that the virus has got no legs. It can't move from one place to the other. It requires a host that it infects to move around to be able to spread it on another person through either the droplet spread or contamination of surfaces, and therefore contaminating the eyes and all of that. So now, if one wants to stop the spread, it's important then that they stop the movement of people. Meaning those who are already infected must be isolated away from the majority of people who are not yet infected.
Mm.
And the thinking here is that, you know, with the incubation period of this virus being anything from 2 days to up to 14 days, you know, if you then make people to be away from each other for a period of 21 days, it is unlikely that those people who were infectious may still be infectious after a 21-day period. You know, so that is the thinking. So if you separate people, limit, you know, their liberties to, you know, a right of freedom of movement, and educate people to take, you know, certain precautions in terms of personal hygiene and observe social distance, by doing all of those things, then the number of people that are newly infected in the country would go down. And in fact, countries like China, countries like South Korea, countries like Singapore, they actually went and took a drastic decision to lock down everybody, all right? And the way they did it was such that once they lifted that lockdown, the number of people who were infected or newly infected, it went down drastically. So, which is basically what we're trying to achieve in South Africa. We're saying in South Africa, by having this 21 days lockout or lockdown, we are actually trying to make sure that we limit the possibility of infections. So people have got a nice phrase for that: flattening the curve. Basically, reducing the number of new infections that are out there, and making sure that those who are positive, even those who were asymptomatic, they can now have a period of being symptomatic. They get treated and are isolated so that they pose no danger to the rest of society. So it has worked in other countries, but other countries were very slow in implementing the lockdown. Countries like Italy, countries like Spain, and even the US. So at this point, you have the US having the highest number of people who are COVID-19 positive, more than China, more than Italy. However, with Italy, they are the country with the most deaths, you know, approaching 11,000 mark, much more, almost 3 times or 4 times what China experienced. So the lockdown is really important to mitigate the risk of spread of infection by those who were already infected.
Yeah, I mean, and I also think I agree with you. You know, the idea of the flattening the curve, I think it's also maybe to buy us time to this period is meant to be used to, you know, get your immune system strong, and to also pick up the habits of, because before this, I don't think we were all walking around with hand sanitizer and being particularly careful. So now this is kind of a period where hopefully in this 21-day lockdown, we're going to come out with better practices, and we're going to come out having kind of tried to cater to our physical well-being in that period of time, because I think it's going to be particularly more important for South Africa, considering that we're about to go into winter season, and that is just season prone for like
and the mode of spread of flu, which is prevalent during winter, is basically the same, you know, as this one. So if we now learn social distancing, we now learn the coughing and sneezing etiquette, it will actually go a long way to making sure that there's fewer of us who actually get infected by flu, you know, in just about a month or 2 from now. So so there is an upside to this, that we now have to change our behavior. We need to change our attitudes, and that's the upside from this situation.
Sure. And so also, there's also an element from what I've understood of this being an act of trying to preserve the healthcare system. That so we don't overload it with all of us getting sick at one time. That there's this concept like the trickling into the healthcare system.
Yeah, because if you have a situation where so many people are infected at once, those people, remember now, 20% of those people will need hospitalization. About 5% of those people may actually require, ICU care. So if you have all of these people coming in at the same time, there is no way our healthcare system in South Africa can cope. But even in the US, they are not coping. They have to come up with new hospitals. China could not cope. Italy is not coping. And our healthcare system is a bit challenged compared to those countries. So the purpose of the lockdown, therefore, is to make sure that we reduce the numbers to as low as possible so that those who eventually go to the healthcare system, they don't choke the healthcare system. And that's what we're hoping for. I'm just a bit sad, though, that some of our compatriots are not observing, the rules of the lockdown, they may actually reduce the success that we're hoping to have in terms of reducing the curve. But the majority of South Africans are still abiding by that, and we hope we keep it like that for the next remaining, how many days now? 15 days to go. Yeah.
Right. So now looking at South Africa's situation, we've assumed that we're high risk. And that's because we have high levels of tuberculosis and HIV. Obviously, we haven't really seen it. We haven't really seen it now play out necessarily, but it's just based on the assumption. Can you explain to us what exactly would potentially happen if, let's say, COVID was to meet those high-risk patients, or rather those high-risk people?
Well, you see, this is one unique risk that we have as a country. Italy had its own unique risk on top of the fact that they were slow off the mark. One of their risks was the fact that they've got a huge percentage of what we call elderly, all right, who already had pre-existing, health challenges from smoking, from drinking, and all of that. Our unique risk in South Africa, remember, we are the country with the most number of people who are living with HIV, right? At least about 7 million people in South Africa. Of that 7 million plus kind of people, there's still a percentage of people who are not on treatment, okay? And so their immune system, even if, let's say, 2 million of those people were not on treatment. Now, if those people get COVID-19 infection, and also knowing that TB and HIV are actually comrades, when you see one, you are likely to see the other. And then you add, COVID-19 there, then you have a recipe for disaster. So it was good that our country, by week 3 of finding the first case, we already went into lockdown, because then that means we are going to try and have fewer infections that would have spread to that group of people. But the other worrying thing, though, as a country, is that the messaging that we have been pushing doesn't seem to have gone to, people at informal settlements and rural areas. And that could be a challenge, because as we've been seeing on TV, some of the people are not observing, the social, distance that we expect. Part of it is because, how do you have social distance in a one-roomed, shack? So I'm happy, though, that the government seems to be looking at a plan of isolating people who are positive, who come from such environments, so that they don't go back and spread in those communities where social distance is practically impossible.
Yeah, this is very much a kind of socioeconomic issue as well. And I agree that this information needs to reach all corners of South Africa. Can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
I'm not sure what has happened there.
Hello? Hello. Hello. Hi. Are you
Hi.
back?
Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry, man, about that. The network at our offices just decided to give me some heart attack. Nearly gave me a heart attack. I'm sorry about that.
No,
Yeah.
it's fine. I
Yeah.
think I just want to go into a series of a couple of questions. I mean, we've really managed to take 45 minutes. So I want to just get some questions out that people have been sending me specifically. One of them is, I am highly asthmatic. This is a big one for me. I'm highly asthmatic. How will I know the difference between suffering a shortness of breath and the virus from the virus and just an asthma attack?
Right. I think one of the most important things is that, firstly, if somebody is an asthmatic, they know how they normally present with asthma. Normally, you have a situation where either because you were exposed to some dust or there was a change in weather, you entered a room that has just been vacuumed. So there's normally a trigger in the environment that triggers, the attack, and people normally know what the triggers are, for their asthma attack. So, but the key feature of asthma is that, yes, you do get tightening of the chest, but the key feature is that there tends to be what we call wheezing. As the airways get to be closed because of the swelling within the tubes, then as the air goes in and out, it causes some sound, which we call wheezing. So wheezing would not necessarily be there, with COVID-19. However, you can have your asthma attack triggered by this viral infection. So it's very, very difficult to actually say, is this purely an asthma attack that I'm used to, or is it actually COVID-19, or it's a bit of both? But in the common presentation, there would be the other symptoms then, like a raise in the body temperature, which we call, raise in the body temperature or fever, which doesn't normally, it's not normally a symptom that you find in somebody with asthma. All right, so that the general rise in the body temperature, the sore throat, the sneezing would not normally be signs of asthma. Most of the symptoms of asthma tend to be in the lower respiratory tract. All right.
Okay.
So in your case, you presented with some difficulty in the lower respiratory tract where you felt like something is actually pressing on your chest, which is why also the doctor did think that maybe you're one of those people who are experiencing, asthma in an older, age. Because most people, they normally have asthma attacks from a much younger age, as kids. And then when they're around 12, 13, they outgrow it. But there are a few people who present with asthma later on, in life, beyond the ages of 20. So it's not very easy to say this is the difference, but there would be general systemic symptoms with COVID-19 as compared to localized symptoms in the respiratory tract for asthma. And there will be wheezing in most of the times. So I think that's how I would answer that question.
Right. So you just have to look out for the added symptom on top of your normal your normal symptoms.
Yes.
Okay, great. So somebody said, what about pregnant women? Should one be fearful for their unborn child and for themselves should they contract the COVID-19 virus?
Yeah. Well, when somebody is pregnant, that's a stressor to the body. Most people, even a normal pregnancy, their immune system goes down a little bit, and therefore one would expect that, their chances of getting a viral infection like this one are much higher because of the fact that their immune system is not performing optimally.
Okay.
But if one looks at some of the research that has been done throughout the world in these 3 months, there doesn't seem to be any reason for people to worry that because I'm pregnant, it may cause a problem in my unborn baby or a baby is born with some abnormalities. I have not come across any literature that links COVID-19 to things like maybe preterm labor, that is delivery before time, or difficulties like maybe stillborns and stuff like that. So I have not come across in the literature that I've been going through anything like that. So, but having said that, if somebody is pregnant, they need to take the precautions of trying to avoid any possible infection by COVID-19. Because what has also been found is that whilst we are dealing with the same virus, but its behavior in different regions of the world, it's not exactly the same. So we therefore advise people that if you're pregnant, try and make sure that you keep that that social distance, and even better, go and have your flu vaccine as we are coming to our winter now, so that at least you've got one more thing to not worry about, which is flu.
Right.
But yes, the answer to your question, there is no evidence, at least for now, that I've come across that says getting COVID-19 infection whilst you are pregnant actually endangers your unborn baby.
Right. And it seems to be, even with children, with young children, it doesn't seem to be something that is dangerous.
Yes.
And it seems that they generally tend to show mild symptoms if they do have it.
Yes, but I must also say though that in the research that some of the literature I've gone through, they say globally less than 2% of infections by COVID-19 are for people under the age of 19, and less than 1% is people under the age of 10. All right. So what you are seeing then is that whilst it can affect anybody of any age, the likelihood of affecting younger people or children is very, very small. But this week, there was a report in one of the European countries where a child actually died from complications of COVID-19. So I had not come across that kind of information before. So yes, it can actually cause, an illness, but very few, children actually present with the infection, let alone a severe illness that will actually take them to hospital or even death. But yes, it can even cause death when it is there, but it's very rare.
Okay, cool. Again, I just want to, oh, sorry, not again, but I want to go to the point of anti-inflammatories. Now, there was so much uncertainty around them. I think the French and Italian governments had said that, these things had been things to exacerbate some of the illness, but WHO then came out, WHO being the World Health Organization, came out to say that there was no damning evidence against anti-inflammatories. Are we to take that? And is there something else that we should rather be taking, or what's your perspective on that?
All right. Yes, I've been keeping tabs of that as well. Specifically, there is an anti-inflammatory that is called ibuprofen. People will know the name of Brufen or Nurofen. All right. It's an anti-inflammatory that people can even get over the counter. So the accusation was that people who take ibuprofen and they are COVID-19, positive, it actually increases their chances of a severe illness and even possible death. That was the allegation out there. So at the beginning, the World Health Organization then issued information, where they were saying, people should not take, ibuprofen. But they later changed their stance, where they are saying they advise people not to take it. But they didn't have the strong language that they had initially used to say complete no. But and the reason of this controversy is that in the labs there is evidence that ibuprofen may actually boost the number of receptors that are called ACE2 receptors, and those are the very receptors that the virus uses to actually cause the infection. So that was the thinking in theory, but in reality there isn't any convincing evidence that by taking ibuprofen it actually increases your chances of a severe illness or even death. And another doctor, from UCLA, one of the Ivy League universities in America, Dr. Otto Ouyang, who is actually a specialist in infectious diseases, he actually came out as well as a leading thinker in this space, saying basically this has been misinformation. It has been, handled badly. It should not have even come out, in the public, media, because it has caused a lot of, paranoia and stuff. So basically, the answer is there is no scientific evidence that ibuprofen actually causes severe illness or even death. But something like paracetamol, which is Panado, different type of chemical, can be used to actually reduce the body temperature, or if somebody has got painful body, other anti-inflammatories as well. So, but the specific one that people were talking about was the Brufen. I think, basically people must take it with caution, but if they can try others, that would be the best thing to do.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that point. That was a big one for me because I think at the time that I got ill, the statement was that do not take anti-inflammatories. So I'm so happy to kind of get a final conclusion on that. I mean, I avoided them anyway, but
Yeah.
it's nice for everybody else to know that it's not the big issue that it was made or
Yes.
conflated to be.
Yeah.
Another, I'm gonna ask one more question from somebody who really pressed me to ask this one. I've noticed that my respiratory tract has become noticeably dry, almost with no mucus, and I'm struggling to swallow. Is this a symptom of COVID-19? And what should I be taking if it is?
All right. Look, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a symptom of COVID-19. Remember, the majority of people will present with a combination of symptoms of the upper respiratory tract, that is, you know, sneezing, a bit of a blocked nose, sore throat, and you know, coughing. All right. So it's unlikely that it will just present with just one thing. I know in your case, it was just one symptom in the lower respiratory tract. What I think is likely a situation with the person you're talking about, obviously one would have loved to ask more questions if that person was here. What I think is likely to be the case, you know, some people suffer from what we call hypersensitivity, meaning their immune system is oversensitive. All right. And a person with oversensitive immune system, they normally react to stuff that is in the environment. It could be the pollen from the trees. It could be pollen from the flowers. It could be house dust mite. It could be a number of things in the environment. So when you inhale polluted air that has got those things, then it triggers a reaction in your airways. And so you start feeling like your airways are actually dry. You start to get a dry cough, which is a milder form of asthma. But in its worst form, it can then progress to a point where the lining of the, of the airways becomes so swollen, and then you present with a typical picture of asthma where you are, you are battling for air and you are wheezing and all of that. So if I had to say, is this a sign of COVID-19 or symptom? I would say it's unlikely, but it's more likely somebody who maybe has not yet been, diagnosed to be somebody with hypersensitivity or overactive, or oversensitive immune system. That's the likely answer to that question. More than that, it's something that's pointing to COVID-19.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering that question and all the others. I think that we've gotten a much more clearer picture of what's happening across the world and with all the research that's going on. Obviously, it's, again, we've said playing out in real time, but I really appreciate it coming from a medical specialist. I think I could not have answered the questions that were being posed to me. So I really appreciate you giving us some advice, and of course, more reason to stay locked down in the lockdown.
Definitely.
I look forward to more of your educational videos, and hopefully we'll have another discussion coming up.
We definitely, I'll make myself available, because we really need to push through the message, maybe even in vernacular language, because many people out there are not so comfortable with, with the Queen's language. But yes, I'll make myself available should you need, any collaboration. And in terms of the video of this interview, both interviews, they will be available via YouTube. And I'll also send you some links so that you can be able to share on your own platforms. So I want to thank everyone who has been watching.
Thank you to everyone. Okay,
all right. Thank you very much. People think you are quite brave to come out with all the stigma and everything. So just keep up that courage. There's a bigger picture out there, and this experience that you have will change you for life. And so just keep on doing good for South Africa. We need more people like you to actually, look at how they can contribute to society. What you did even before you were tested was something that showed a high sense of responsibility And for that, I think I must thank you, because more people could have been infected had you not done that.
Thank
So
you.
good
I
luck.
really appreciate that. And I honestly do appreciate the support from just South Africans. And I really, I think it's so important. That's my main idea, is the fact that we're sharing. And so I'm also really grateful to you for having created a platform where we can get all that knowledge from you, from someone that is a doctor. So
and you can share as well. You know? Yeah. So what's your closing message though to South Africans who are watching?
I mean, for me, I think my closing message is the fact that the best way to deal with the situation is to take care of yourself. That's like how you're going to show Ubuntu, is to literally take care of yourself, adhere to the lockdown, educate yourself as much as you can. And in that way, it protects those that are around you and has kind of like a tenfold effect. I think if we all have that attitude, we can make it out of this. So very importantly, take care of yourself. It's the best act in taking care of the vulnerable.
All right. Now, thank you very much for availing yourself and sharing, info about, your experience. And may you enjoy the isolation at home, seeing that you have not been cleared as yet. Yeah, looking forward to hearing from you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, Doc.
Bye.